The metallic click echoed through the silent courtroom as Marcus Dalton placed his dog tags on the wooden table. Judge Howard Preston leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He had just ordered a homeless man to remove what he called a theatrical prop. But what the judge didn't know was that those worn pieces of metal carried a code that would unravel his entire career in less than 72 hours, because some symbols aren't just accessories. Some symbols are earned in blood. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country, and if stories like this one, about courage, sacrifice, and second chances, speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now, let's continue. Marcus Dalton woke that Tuesday morning the same way he had woken every morning for the past 4 years. Cold, stiff, alone. The concrete under the Veterans Memorial Bridge offered no comfort, but it offered something more important. It offered cover. The early November rain had stopped sometime around 3 a.m., but the dampness clung to everything. His bones, his threadbare blanket, the military-issued rucksack that contained the only 3 possessions that still mattered to him. He sat up slowly, his 52-year-old body protesting every movement. The scar across his left temple throbbed, the way it always did when the weather changed. He ran his calloused hand over his grey beard, feeling the weight of another day pressing down on him like enemy fire. But Marcus Dalton had survived worse than cold concrete and empty stomachs. He had survived Mogadishu. He had survived Fallujah. He had survived watching 6 of his men die in an ambush he couldn't prevent. Surviving himself, though, that was the hardest battle of all. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the dog tags hanging from a worn metal chain around his neck. The engravings were faded but still legible. Dalton, Marcus J., his service number, his blood type, and beneath it all the code that once meant everything. 75th Ranger Regiment. He held them for a moment, feeling the grooves worn smooth by decades of wear, then tucked them back under his shirt. They stayed hidden most days, not because he was ashamed, but because the world had stopped caring who he used to be. By 7 a.m., Marcus had folded his blanket with the precision of a man who spent 23 years in the military. The olive-green fabric still bore the faded patch of the Rangers, stitched on by hands that once moved with confidence and purpose. He placed it carefully into his rucksack, along with the other 2 items that traveled with him everywhere. A laminated photograph of his platoon in Kandahar, all of them young and smiling, most of them dead now, and a broken military radio that had belonged to his best friend, Tommy Reeves. Tommy, who had died in his arms in 2006, whispering the names of his wife and daughter, while his blood soaked into the sand. Marcus carried that radio like a lifeline. Some nights, when the darkness pressed too close and the screams echoed too loud in his head, he would hold it and whisper into the static, telling Tommy about his day, apologizing for still being alive, asking for forgiveness he knew would never come. He walked 3 blocks to the public restroom behind the old gas station on Maple Street, the one with the broken lock that nobody bothered to fix. He washed his face in the sink, scrubbing the grime from under his fingernails, trying to look presentable, trying to look human. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. He stared at his reflection, seeing a ghost. The man looking back at him had the same steel-grey eyes, the same squared jaw, but everything else was hollow, carved out, empty. At 8:15 a.m., Marcus was standing outside the New Hope Community Shelter on Jefferson Avenue, waiting for them to open. A line of 12 other people stood with him. Some he recognized. Others were new to the streets. He nodded to a younger man, shivering in a torn jacket, probably mid-20s with the hollow stare Marcus knew too well. Another veteran, you could always tell. When the doors opened, Marcus stepped aside, letting the younger man go first. The kid looked at him, surprised. "You were here first," he muttered. Marcus shook his head. "You need it more." Inside, a volunteer named Claire handed him a bundle of folded clothes, clean but worn. A button-up shirt that was 2 sizes too big, and a pair of jeans with a patched knee. "You have somewhere to be today, Marcus," she asked gently. Claire was one of the good ones. She never looked at him with pity, just kindness. Caught, Marcus said quietly. Got picked up 2 nights ago. Claire's face fell. What for? Trespassing. Slept in the covered parking lot of that old shopping center off Route 9 during the storm. She sighed, shaking her head. You were just trying to stay dry. Marcus didn't answer. What was there to say? The law was the law. And he had learned long ago that the law didn't bend for men like him. Men who had given everything and been given nothing in return. By 9:30, Marcus was sitting in the back of a Whitmore County Sheriff's transport van with 4 other people. None of them spoke. The van smelled like sweat, stale cigarettes, and defeat. The deputy driving didn't look back at them once. Just another morning. Just another round of nameless faces shuffling through the system. The Whitmore County Municipal Courthouse was a gray, squat building that looked like it had been designed to crush hope. The inside was worse. Dark wood paneling. Fluorescent lights that flickered. The air conditioning rattled so loudly it was hard to think. Marcus sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway outside Courtroom B, his hands folded in his lap, his dog tags resting against his chest under the oversized shirt. Across from him sat a young woman in a blazer that looked too new, holding a manila folder like it was a shield. She glanced at him, then looked away quickly. His court-appointed lawyer, probably. Fresh out of law school, nervous. He had seen that look before, on the faces of young soldiers right before their first firefight. Mr. Dalton, she finally said, her voice small. Marcus looked up. Yes, ma'am. She blinked, surprised by the respect in his tone. I'm Julia Santos. I've been assigned to your case. She opened the folder, scanning the single page inside. It says here you were arrested for trespassing on private property, the old Riverside Mall parking structure. Yes, ma'am. Were you aware it was private property? Yes, she hesitated. Then why? It was raining, Marcus said simply. I needed cover. Julia looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll try to get the charges reduced or dismissed. This is a first offense for you, and given the circumstances, don't worry about it, Marcus interrupted gently. I broke the law. I'll take what's coming. Julia frowned. Mr. Dalton, you don't have to. The door to Courtroom B swung open, and a bailiff stepped out. Dalton, you're up. Marcus stood, his posture instinctively straightening, shoulders back, head high, muscle memory from 23 years of standing at attention. Julia scrambled to her feet, clutching her folder, and followed him inside. The courtroom was small, suffocating. Only a handful of people sat scattered in the benches, a bailiff near the door. A middle-aged man in the front row with a phone balanced on his knee, recording video for some local blog nobody would read. A woman at the stenography machine, her fingers poised over the keys, her face carefully neutral. And behind the prosecutor's table, a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, flipping through a stack of papers without looking up. But it was the man behind the bench who commanded the room. Judge Howard Preston. 58 years old, silver hair swept back, a permanent expression of disdain etched into his face, like it had been carved there by years of looking down on people he considered beneath him. He didn't look at Marcus when he entered, didn't acknowledge him, just tapped his gavel once and said, Case number 4723, People versus Marcus Dalton. Marcus stood in front of the bench, his hands at his sides. Julia stood beside him, her fingers gripping the folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Judge Preston finally looked up, his cold blue eyes sweeping over Marcus like he was cataloguing a stain. Mr. Dalton, you are charged with criminal trespassing on private property. How do you plead? Guilty, Your Honor, Marcus said evenly. Julia turned to him, startled. Mr. Dalton, we haven't discussed. I did what they said I did, Marcus said quietly. No point in pretending otherwise. Judge Preston leaned back in his chair, a thin smile forming. Well, at least you're honest. He glanced down at the file in front of him. Says here you have no permanent address, no employment, no family listed as next of kin. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. You're homeless. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said. Preston sighed, the sound dripping with condescension. "Another vagrant clogging up my courtroom. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Dalton? Any reason I shouldn't throw the book at you?" Marcus hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I was trying to stay out of the rain, Your Honor. I wasn't causing trouble. I wasn't bothering anyone. I just needed a dry place for the night." "So you decided to break the law?" "Yes, sir." Preston shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. "You know what I'm tired of, Mr. Dalton. I'm tired of people like you thinking the rules don't apply to them, thinking you can do whatever you want because you're down on your luck." He leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "Life is hard for everyone, but most people find a way to follow the law. Most people find a way to contribute to society instead of leeching off it." Marcus said nothing. His jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward. Judge Preston's gaze dropped to Marcus's chest, where the chain of his dog tags was barely visible above the collar of his shirt. The judge's eyes flickered with something close to disgust. "What is that around your neck?" Marcus instinctively reached up, his fingers brushing the chain. "Dog tags, Your Honor." Preston's face twisted. "Dog tags." He said the words like they tasted foul. "Let me guess. You're going to tell me you're a veteran, that you served your country, that I should go easy on you because of it?" "No, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly. "I wasn't going to say that." "Good," Preston snapped, "because I've heard that story 100 times. Every vagrant who comes through here has some sob story about how they used to be somebody." He pointed at the dog tags. "Those things? You probably bought them at an army surplus store for $5. Take them off. This is a courtroom, not a costume party." The room went silent. Julia took a sharp breath. "Your Honor, I don't think—" "Did I ask for your opinion, Counselor?" Preston cut her off coldly. He turned back to Marcus. "I said take them off, now." Marcus didn't move. His hands remained at his sides, his grey eyes locked on the judge. "With respect, Your Honor, I'd prefer not to." Preston's face flushed red. "Prefer not to?" His voice rose. "You don't get to prefer anything in my courtroom. You think wearing those makes you special? You think it gives you some kind of pass?" He stood, leaning over the bench, his voice dripping with venom. "I've seen 100 men like you, claiming service, claiming sacrifice. But what I see is someone who gave up on himself and expects the rest of us to carry him." Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not asking anyone to carry me, Your Honor." "Then prove it," Preston hissed. "Remove those tags. Right now, or I will hold you in contempt and you'll spend the next 30 days in county lockup. Your choice." The stenographer stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. The prosecutor, Rebecca Hart, looked up from her papers, her brow furrowed. The bailiff near the door, a man in his early 30s named Marcus Lowe, shifted his weight uncomfortably. He was former Marine Corps. He knew what dog tags meant. He knew you didn't ask a man to take them off. Not ever. But Marcus Dalton didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached up, his rough hands grasping the chain around his neck, and pulled it over his head. The dog tags came free, dangling from his fingers. He stepped forward and placed them carefully on the wooden table in front of the bench. The metal clinked softly, a small sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Judge Preston smirked. "There. Was that so hard?" Marcus took a step back, his hands falling to his sides. His voice, when he spoke, was low, calm, laced with something cold and immovable. "Your Honor, before you continue, I'd like to ask you something." Preston raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to ask me anything." "Are you sure," Marcus said slowly, his grey eyes locked on the judge, "that you want me to remove these?" Preston laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "I already told you to, and you did. So yes, I'm sure." Marcus nodded once. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "These tags carry my name, Marcus J. Dalton, my service number, my blood type, and the code of the 75th Ranger Regiment." He paused, letting the words settle. "They were issued to me at Fort Benning in 1991. They were with me in Mogadishu in 93 when I lost 18 brothers. They were with me in Fallujah in 2006 when I held a defensive position alone for 4 hours, while men bled out around me. Because if I moved, 14 soldiers would have died. The air in the room shifted. The smirk faded from Judge Preston's face. Marcus continued, his voice still low, still steady. These tags have blood in the scratches that no amount of washing will ever remove. They've been soaked in sand, in rain, in the tears of men who didn't make it home. But if you think they're a prop, Your Honor, if you think they're something I bought to gain sympathy, then maybe you should hold them in contempt too. No one moved. No one breathed. Bailiff Marcus Lowe stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly. Your Honor, he said, his voice tight. May I? Preston, his face pale now, waved a hand dismissively. Lowe picked up the dog tags, turning them over in his hands. He read the engravings, his eyes widening. He knew that unit code. He had heard stories, legends, and then he saw the name. Dalton. His breath caught. He looked up at Marcus, his voice shaking. Ironside? Marcus didn't answer. Lowe turned to the judge, his face stricken. Your Honor, this man isn't lying. This code, this unit, it's real. And if this is who I think it is... He stopped, his voice breaking. Sir, I served in the Marines. I know what these mean. You don't fake this. You can't. At the stenography machine, Martha Yates, a 55-year-old woman with grey streaks in her hair, stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Tears welled in her eyes. My father wore tags like those, she whispered, her voice thick. He died with them on, in Vietnam. She looked at Marcus, and something crumbled in her expression. My God. Prosecutor Rebecca Hart set down her pen. It rolled off the edge of the table and clattered to the floor. She didn't pick it up. She just stared at Marcus, her mouth slightly open, her face drained of color. She had been prepared to argue for a fine, maybe community service. She had not been prepared for this. Julia Santos covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had thought this was just another case, another file, another face, but now she understood. She was standing next to someone who had given everything, and the system, her system, had tried to humiliate him for it. In the front row, Kevin Wu, the freelance reporter, kept his phone steady, his hands shaking. He had been filming routine court proceedings for a local blog. Now he realized he was recording something that was going to explode. He didn't stop. He couldn't. Judge Preston opened his mouth, then closed it. His face had gone from red to white. I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor, Marcus said quietly, cutting him off. I broke the law. I was trespassing. You can fine me. You can sentence me. You can do whatever you think is just, but don't you ever tell me these tags are fake. What Judge Preston didn't realize in that moment, as the silence thickened around him like fog, was that the young man with the phone in the front row had just uploaded a 20-second clip to his social media. And somewhere, in a town 3 states away, a retired Army colonel was watching it. Within the hour, it would have 10,000 shares. Within 3 hours, 500,000. And within a day, the entire country would know the name Marcus Ironside Dalton. But more importantly, they would know the name Howard Preston. And they would not forget. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to recover. Mr. Dalton, I didn't mean to imply... Yes, you did, Marcus said simply. Preston's mouth snapped shut. His hands gripped the edge of the bench. For the first time in 30 years on the bench, Howard Preston had no idea what to say. Rebecca Hart stood, her voice quiet but firm. Your Honor, the people would like to move for immediate dismissal of all charges. Preston turned to her, startled. What? Immediate dismissal, Hart repeated, her voice stronger now. This man was trying to survive a storm. He wasn't vandalizing property. He wasn't threatening anyone. And given his service record, I believe any further prosecution would be, frankly, unjust. Judge Preston stared at her, then at Marcus, then down at the dog tag still sitting on the table. He swallowed hard. Fine. Motion granted. Charges dismissed. Mr. Dalton, you're free to go. Marcus stepped forward, reaching for his dog tags. He picked them up slowly, the chain sliding between his fingers. He didn't put them back on. Not yet. He just held them, looking down at the worn metal, and for a moment his expression softened. Then he looked up at Judge Preston, his grey eyes cold and unwavering. "Thank you, Your Honor." He turned and walked toward the exit, his steps measured, his back straight. Julia Santos hurried after him, still clutching her folder. Bailiff Marcus Lowe stood at attention as Marcus passed, his hand rising instinctively in a salute. Marcus paused, met his eyes, and gave a single nod. Then he pushed through the doors and disappeared into the hallway. Behind him, Judge Howard Preston sank into his chair, his hands trembling. He didn't know it yet, but his career had just ended. The video was already spreading like wildfire. Veterans organizations were already mobilizing. Journalists were already writing headlines, and the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Kevin Wu was the first to leave the courtroom, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He had posted the full video now. 5 minutes of raw, unfiltered truth. He didn't edit it. He didn't add commentary, he just let the moment speak for itself. By the time he reached his car, the video had been shared 6,000 times. By the time he got home, it had reached 400,000. And by the time the sun set that evening, the hashtag Justice for Ironside was trending nationally. Marcus didn't know any of this. He walked out of the courthouse and into the grey November afternoon, the dog tags heavy in his hand. He stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting it fill his lungs. Then he turned left and started walking. He had nowhere to be. No one waiting for him. But for the first time in 4 years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. He felt seen. 3 days later, everything changed. Marcus woke under the Veterans Memorial Bridge to the sound of footsteps. Multiple people. His body tensed instinctively, old instincts kicking in. He sat up quickly, his hand reaching for the rucksack beside him. But when he looked up, he saw Bailiff Marcus Lowe standing at the edge of the bridge, still in his uniform, holding a folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "Easy, Sergeant," Lowe said gently, holding up the coffee. "I'm not here to arrest you." Marcus blinked, confused. "Then why are you here?" Lowe stepped closer, his expression serious. "Because you're all over the news, sir. The whole country is talking about what happened in that courtroom." Marcus frowned. "I don't understand." "The video," Lowe said. "The reporter, Kevin Wu, he filmed the whole thing. It's gone viral. Millions of views. Veterans groups are rallying. Politicians are issuing statements. And Judge Preston." Lowe's mouth tightened. "He's been suspended pending an investigation." Marcus stared at him. "Suspended?" "He's done, sir," Lowe said quietly. "His career is over. The Judicial Council is reviewing his conduct. There's already a petition with over 2 million signatures calling for his removal." Marcus looked down at his hands, still holding the dog tags. He didn't know what to feel. Relief? Anger? Vindication? It all felt distant. Unreal. Lowe set the coffee down on the concrete and handed Marcus the folder. "This is for you. A group of us, veterans from around the county, we pulled some resources together. There's a lease agreement in there for a 1-bedroom apartment over on 7th Street, fully furnished, 6 months of rent paid in advance, and an appointment next week with a PTSD counselor who specializes in combat veterans." Marcus opened the folder slowly, his hands trembling. He stared at the papers, the words blurring in front of his eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you shouldn't be out here, sir," Lowe said, his voice thick. "You've already given enough." Marcus shook his head, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. "I didn't do anything." "You did everything," Lowe said firmly, "and it's time someone did something for you." Later that week, Prosecutor Rebecca Hart personally delivered a formal apology to Marcus at the shelter. She stood in front of him, her hands clasped tightly, her voice steady. "Mr. Dalton, I'm sorry. I should have looked deeper into your case. I should have seen past the surface, and I promise you, I'll do better." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you." The Department of Veterans Affairs reopened his case. Within 2 weeks, his benefits were reinstated, including 4 years of back pay. Enough to keep him stable while he rebuilt his life. Enough to breathe. And on a cold morning in mid-November, Marcus Ironside Dalton stood in the doorway of a small apartment on 7th Street, holding the key in his hand. The place smelled like fresh paint and possibility. He stepped inside, setting his rucksack down by the door. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the street below, watching people move past, unaware of the man watching them, a man who had fallen, who had been forgotten, but who had never stopped being a soldier. He pulled the dog tags from his pocket and set them carefully in a small wooden box on the dresser next to the laminated photograph of his platoon in Kandahar. He didn't need to wear them anymore. He knew who he was. And now finally, so did the world. That night, Marcus returned to the Veterans Memorial Bridge, not to sleep, but to find the others, the men and women still living in the shadows, still waiting for someone to see them. He brought blankets, food, information about the shelters and programs that actually worked, and he sat with them, one by one, listening to their stories, offering no judgment, only presence. Because Marcus Dalton understood something the world often forgot. Every person had fought a battle, every person carried scars, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't charging into enemy fire. It was sitting beside someone in the cold and reminding them they weren't alone. 3 months later, Marcus was invited to speak at a Memorial Day ceremony at the County Veterans Hall. He stood at the podium in a borrowed suit, looking out at the faces staring back at him. Politicians, active duty soldiers, families of the fallen. And in the back row, a group of homeless veterans he had been working with, all of them clean, all of them hopeful. He didn't prepare a speech. He just spoke from the heart. "I don't know why I'm still here," he said quietly. "I don't know why I survived when so many others didn't, but I do know this. We don't honor the fallen by forgetting the living. We honor them by taking care of each other, by seeing each other, by refusing to let anyone become invisible." The applause was thunderous. But Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at the men and women in the back row, the ones who understood, the ones who knew what it meant to fall, and what it meant to be lifted back up. As for Judge Howard Preston, he resigned 4 weeks after the video went viral. The investigation found multiple instances of misconduct, bias, and abuse of power. His name, once respected, became a cautionary tale, and Marcus never thought about him again. Because some battles aren't worth refighting, some enemies aren't worth remembering, and some victories are quieter than others. Marcus had spent 4 years on the streets, invisible and forgotten. But he had never stopped being a Ranger. He had never stopped being Ironside. And now the world knew it too. He kept the dog tags in the wooden box, next to Tommy's radio and the photograph of the men who didn't come home. And every morning, before he went out to help the others still struggling, he would open the box and run his fingers over the worn metal, not as a reminder of who he used to be, but as a promise that no matter how far you fall, you can always find your way back, as long as someone is willing to see you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible, that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel. And right now on your screen, you'll see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember, every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching.